Coming up on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDPH with an in-depth analysis on how it impacts you. Of course, we are making our way towards the end of the masking mandate here in the state of California for public schools, but not every district is going to be following that mandate recommendation. We'll talk to two district administrators coming up.
The ACSA Legislative Lunch Break starts now.
And it is just after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Edgar Zazwat, ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. I'm Naj and Edgar, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome to our show here. Go ahead and jump onto our chat, say hello. Let us know where you're watching from, what's happening in your region today. Edgar, how are you today?
I'm good, Naj. It's good to be back here doing this again. We got to see some folks over the weekend. You took the show on the road, which was kind of fun. So I know we'll talk about that a little bit. So doing good. Trying to jump back in. Rules changing. Folks are navigating the ever-changing waters. But happy to be here.
Happy to be here. Mark Campbell from Region 7 Calaveras Unified is our first on the chat today. Ty Bryson, good to see you. Beth Bray, our longtime viewer, Angela Shell with us as well. You heard Edgar talk about where we were this weekend. We'll show you that in just a second. Of course, we are making our way towards close of business March 11th, which is when the masking mandates here in California public schools will come to an end. We'll talk with two district administrators coming up a little bit later on in the show. They'll talk to us about their strategies and best practices, because one of them has a district that will be enacting those masking policies and another who is waiting. So we'll get that information coming up. A couple of things that we wanted to just make note of, as Edgar mentioned to you, we were on the road this week, really live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Edgar, I think you would agree that we could not have made this more live and more interactive than we did this past weekend. Let me show you first off from Friday. Well, there you go. That's ACSA Mid-State Conference right there. That's where Edgar and I were on Saturday. We were joined right there by Jack O'Connell, former state superintendent of public instruction. And then we also had John Laird, Senator, and Assembly Member Richard Rivas with us at Mid-State. Edgar, I'll ask you, because when we talked with Jack, and we gave him a hard time, we'll tell you why in just a second. When we talked with Jack, when we talked with Senator Laird, when we talked with Assembly Member Richard Rivas, they all three talked about the importance of ACSA members, school leaders, telling their story. We've seen how impactful it's been throughout this pandemic, the telling the stories, but they really wanted to make sure that that message went out to administrators. Keep telling that story.
Yeah. But I thought you were going to ask me why my socks were so bright. That's the first thing that stood out in the picture. But I always have to remember, especially when you're going to end up on stage, that first thing that caught my eye. But lesson learned on my end. No, to your point, it was a great event. It was fun to do it in person. It was fun to interact with Jack O'Connell, old friend, also with two great legislators that gave a lot of her time to the folks locally. I think that was the theme, a theme of just that the last couple of years have been challenging for everybody, for our administrators. But one of the messages that we continue to underscore here as an organization is that value of not only coming together, the professional development, but making our voices heard. And advocacy takes very different flavors, right? And I think just what was happening there at the Mid-State Conference of bringing people in, having this Q&A, I was pleasantly surprised that the folks that joined us, the legislators, Senator Laird, Assemblyman Robert Rivas, they were talking about the issues that were big on the radar of our folks, even before we didn't give them a heads up. Because that is a testament of our folks doing that grassroots advocacy and actually engaging in those conversations even before these events.
Yeah. I want to say hello to Gary Reller, John Huber, Terry Rufert, John Eberly, Maria Thompson. So good to have you guys on the show. Let me take you back to Friday because Edgar and I had the opportunity to go to Hollister, to San Benito High School, and see an amazing campus there. That is Adam Breen over on the left side, our great ACSA board member Sean Tenenbaum from Region 10, next to Edgar. I had no idea that I was going to be the shortest among the four of us, Edgar. Look, I know I'm not a skyscraper, but I did not realize until I saw this photo that I was clearly the shortest. But we talked about this at Midstate, and I would encourage everybody, if you're ever in one of those days where the challenges are immense, and you need that little bit of juice to remind you about why you're in this business, why we're all in this business. Go talk to Sean. Go see what he's done from a master planning and from a programmatic standpoint, Edgar, because I know that you were very impressed with what you saw.
Yeah, and I told Sean this, and this is not just, testament that it wasn't just because he hosted us, and they were great hosts. I mean, met with some of their students, saw their program. It was, quite frankly, one of the most impressive high school campuses I had ever seen, from a programmatic standpoint, from a facility standpoint, like you said, from a master planning standpoint. So I really enjoyed my day there, especially, again, seeing a community talk about some of where we had some challenging years, but how they're starting to come out of, hearing from students directly how much that campus means to them, how much their educators mean to them. And a special shout out to our member, Sean. I mean, walking around campus, not 3,500 students, I think it is. He knew a ton of people just going around by first name. So it was pretty impressive. And they were great hosts.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great trip. Hey, before we go to our news headlines, want to do a shout out, and you can see the Elk Grove High School football helmet back here. A quick shout out to Elk Grove High School, to the Thundering Herd. Their boys varsity basketball team advanced to the Division II state championship. They will play Foothill Knights of Santa Ana on Saturday here in Sacramento. I'm pulling for Elk Grove High because I've coached soccer over there. So Thundering Herd, hope you guys have a great, successful Saturday Division II championship game happening here in Sacramento. Edgar, we are going to talk about masking and the end of that mandatory masking mandate, which happens close of business March 11th. Let me just ask you a couple of things. One, the state released a document earlier today providing local considerations for universal masking requirements effective March 12th. I'll have you refer to that second, but you said that there's just something that's come out within the last few hours, changes to the CDPH guidance.
Yeah, something we anticipated, given that the mask requirements, as you said, expires at the end of the day on Friday, close the business there, or I think it's actually the end of the formal day, so how the order is written. So what are the rules? As folks know firsthand, we've been living under a set of rules that say, for example, the modified quarantine. There was different rules if kids were exposed to COVID, if both parties were masked. So how could those be the rules if masks are no longer required? So they've gone ahead and made a number of those adjustments. They've gone through the recommendations to change the references to the masking. In terms of the contact tracing, they had already alluded to this, but there's a shift from this modified quarantine about whether people are wearing masks, but really taking this group tracing. If somebody in a classroom happens to have COVID, what are the options that you have to assess bigger populations? If there's an uptick in transmission, some options that schools may have. Again, these are recommendations, and that's something we've been careful to say. In the early days of COVID, when all these rules were coming out, there was some question about, am I supposed to do this? Is the state giving me a suggestion? I think the state's pretty clear that these are recommendations, but they are amending those because of the change in the policy that's coming up this week.
And as far as this local considerations for maintaining or establishing universal indoor masking requirements in K-12 schools, we're going to go ahead and put that over into our chat, a link to that came out a few hours ago as well. That has some tips, best practices, things you need to know for the district. So we're going to go ahead and put that into the chat. Edgar, many schools are moving forward with the plan to make masking voluntary in their schools. One of the holdouts to lift the mandate was San Francisco Unified School District. However, they will be lifting the requirement for masks in their middle and high school as well as their central office in line with the end of the masking mandate. Now, they will lift the mandatory masking in their pre-K, transitional kindergarten, elementary, and K through 8 schools beginning April 2nd. I want to make a mention of this. In their news release related to spring break, they said all San Francisco Unified students and staff, regardless of whether they are symptomatic or where their work location is, are expected to use the rapid test distributed to them immediately prior to returning from spring break. Spring break takes place March 28th through April 1st, with students returning to schools on Monday, April 4th. So that was an interesting piece of information that I saw come in that news release. And then I want to refer to this as reported by KCRA earlier today, our NBC affiliate here in Sacramento. Sac City Unified will keep their mandatory masking in place. And the earliest that they would drop the mandate would be when students return from spring break on April 11th. So different districts doing different things, which takes us to our subject today on masking and what districts are doing. Let's go ahead and bring in our guest. Juan Cruz is the superintendent at Franklin Mckinley Elementary School District in San Jose, our ACSA Region 8 board member, and Holly Eads, superintendent at Orcutt Union Elementary School District, our former ACSA president. Juan, Holly, it's an honor to have you here on the show. Let me ask both of you, and Holly, I'll have you start. What was the initial reaction to that masking announcement about the end of the mandatory masking? What was the reaction in your school community, and what is the strategy for you moving forward? And then Juan will have you answer as well.
Yeah, generally, our district has followed the guidance as it's been issued all along. So for us, we were waiting to hear what the news was going to be, what the changes would be. And so it didn't come as a huge surprise to us. Of course, we have folks on either side that have opinions about it. But for us, it's always been, we're going to follow the guidance and follow the recommendations of the health officials and the folks that are there issuing the guidance for us. And so for us, it's just about moving forward, and it's about, what are the next steps that we need to put in place to transition to these changes. That, among those, it's going to be really looking at encouraging our community not to make assumptions if our students and staff are or are not wearing masks, and dealing with some of the anxiety or some of the other challenges that some of our students may face as a result. But it's another transition, as has been the case over the last 2 years. It's been all about transition.
Yeah, and for us, there was a little bit of concern. Our community has been heavily impacted by COVID, and so since the beginning of the year, we've been following the guidance and then some. And so we've had indoor and outdoor mask requirements all year long, and so our community was concerned about jumping too soon in terms of removing masks, and so we're taking an approach of a slow approach in regards to our decision. And so we will be keeping the indoor mask requirement through the end of April, which takes us past our spring break, but removing the outdoor mask requirement through keeping it through March 25th, and then allowing students to make that choice outdoors.
Hey, Juan, before I get to my question a little bit, we always have a star-studded, guest here, and two of our distinguished superintendents, ACSA leaders. I give Juan a shout out because he was recently appointed also to the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, which is a big deal here in our state. So just good folks, obviously know folks that deal with credentialing issues, know how complicated and intricate those are. So I know from the ACSA perspective, having one of our own there, helping them make some of those policy decisions is a great thing. So congratulations on that appointment. Wanted to get, and I'll ask both of you, I'll start with you, Juan, is challenges. I know we were talking offline, that so far so good. So hopefully we don't jinx you here, right? Things are relatively good. But has there been challenges? I know everybody was dealing with that uncertainty of not knowing what the announcement was going to mean. you know, in many ways now the state has shifted because for better, for worse, you're the folks who have to feel the brunt of the decision making. You know, how's it gone so far? And has there been challenges in terms of this implementation of the change in rules?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fortunate to be in a community that they've been very supportive from the very beginning in terms of our approach in making sure that we're following the guidelines from public health and ensuring that we're doing everything we can to keep everybody safe. You know, the challenge I have is that we also have some vaccine hesitancy, and so we have a large number of students still that are remain unvaccinated, and so that's sort of the concern for both the staff and parents in regards to, you know, removing masks, and that's why we're taking sort of a slow approach in how we implement these new guidelines.
Holly, same question to you. I know you touched on that a little bit, but I mean, aside from not knowing what was going to come down, kind of what has there been any challenge to this point?
Yeah, I think for us, it's communicating and just being very clear in our communication because things have changed so rapidly. We've tried to be transparent about the fact that the guidance is continuing to change, but just being very clear in our messaging and making sure that our families understand that what the expectations are. And of course, dealing with issues as they come up at school sites and just helping our community understand the importance of, you know, our priority is keeping our schools open and keeping our students and our staff safely in school. That's every decision we make is run through that lens. So when we make a decision, we don't take it lightly. For example, visitors and volunteers, we want to welcome folks to our campuses, but it's about mitigating that risk and keeping our campuses safe for everyone.
Want to remind you, if you have a question or a comment, go ahead and put that into our chat, and we will answer questions as we move towards the end. Holly, let me start with you on this next question. Well, let me provide this for our viewers again with some clarity. Holly, who is at Orcutt Union Elementary School District, that their district will be implementing the new masking guidance effective end of the day, March 11th. Juan, Cruz, superintendent at Franklin Mckinley Elementary School District in San Jose, going to delay that just a bit. So Holly, I'll start with you and then Juan after that. As you know, some school districts are following the same path as your district, pushing back some of these voluntary guidelines or getting them started March 11th. What has been the message to your school communities, and what has been some of that reaction from the teachers, from the parents, from the students? It's a question that Lester Powell asked us a couple of minutes ago. What is that reaction like? Holly, we'll have you start.
Yeah, it's been mixed, but it's been, you know, our parent community, for example, one of the first questions we had is, are you going to follow the guidance? We had protesters in front of our district office before our last board meeting encouraging us to end universal masking. But we also were receiving communication from other parents and from staff members concerned. So it's definitely a mixed response and a mixed response from our students as well in the school sites. That's been a little bit of a challenge, is how to navigate having those conversations and showing students how to have those conversations, modeling that for them, also helping guide them with differing points of view and how to be respectful and how to honor each other's wishes and not have those questions. So that's been a challenge for us. That's been the path that we've been on. As we move forward with implementing the guidance, as I said earlier, there's just still many questions. And I was pouring through that new K-12 schools guidance before we came on, just trying to interpret volunteer policies and looking at where does this place us with modified quarantine. You know, we're not going to be able to utilize it any longer if we don't have universal masking in place, which means that students may miss more school as a result. So just navigating all of that and trying to figure out the best course for our district. Through all of it, there isn't a clear opinion or a clear thought on from our community. You know, it's mixed all the way around at every level, mixed response.
And Juan?
Yeah, no, part of is communication, right? As Holly said, and we've been communicated all along that we were going to take any guidance and really understand it and apply it to our local conditions within our district. And we've been stricter in some of the implementation of that guidance. And so our staff have been very supportive as a result of that, to the point that, we were not asked to have an MOU with our bargaining units, as some, many districts have had. And so part of that is, trying to make sure that we're listening to our staff, students, and parents, and understanding, what is, what are they worrying about? And so how do we make sure that the policies that we put in place align to our goal of keeping students and staff safe and our doors open? And so we've taken that approach, and so far, our community has been very supportive of our district and everything that we've done so far in our approach to keep our students and staff safe.
It's interesting. You both point out, and I know we got some questions about students, how they reacted. I mean, I'm the father of a 14-year-old, and I was asking them, the day of the announcement at soccer practice, I ever heard them talking about this. And there's no one pathway, right? In fact, the majority of the girls said they wanted to keep their masks. What surprised me was it wasn't necessarily because of COVID, that they've just gotten so used to it, right? They've gotten used to just wearing them. And, so it's some interesting conversations. I think, like you said, Holly, I think creating that safe pathway, even for those kids, that regardless of what the rules are going to be, that they're going to have their own perspective. So no, I think it's well said there. We got a question from Zach, and I'll start with you, Juan.
Did we? I think we lost Edgar's microphone. We can't blame our old executives. All right, well, let me go ahead and ask the question then, and Juan will have you start. Zach Larson asked, how did unions respond, and how were unions involved in the various decision making in your communities? Juan, we'll start with you.
Yeah, my union, again, like I said, we've had a pretty good relationship through this process, and they've been trusting that we're doing what we can to keep staff safe. When I went over our proposed guidelines, they were supportive, and actually our certificated, wanted us to leave the door open that it could be extended through the end of the year. And I said, look, everything that we've learned through COVID is that things change, and certainly that may be an option, but we need to make sure that we have data to sort of support that beyond the end of April. And so they've been very supportive so far.
And Holly?
MOU with both of our unions at the beginning of this, classified and certificated, but they really have been partners throughout this process. We've meet with them weekly to have those conversations and continue to do that. They are absolutely in support of us following the guidance. So there really hasn't been too much of a question as to whether or not they would support implementation of the what's coming on the 11th at midnight. They just understood that we're going to follow the guidance as it's issued, and they've been supportive of that.
Naj, I have a theory. I think you thought I was talking too much, and you cut me off. I think that's what would happen, right? that was a subtle sign, but it's been a while. It's been a while since.
Yeah, exactly. And Martha and Amy and Angela will get your questions. We'll address your questions after this segment. Let me give you guys a last question to wrap this up. And Holly, we'll start with you, and then Juan after that. What advice would you give your colleagues about masking, about COVID-19 mitigation as we continue moving through the spring and to the end of the academic year? Are there one or two things that you might give to them as far as advice, how to move forward, how to communicate, how to work with your communities, no matter what it is? Holly, we'll start with you.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's continuing that open, honest communication, transparency, and also modeling that that patience and that grace that we've needed and we've relied on through this entire process. That it's not just about giving that to the district, but also giving that to each other, and being there to support each other, that we're all on the same team. We all want what's best for our students and what's best for our community. So I think relationships, continuing to provide that message that on personal wellness, staff wellness, student wellness, just continuing to be a sounding board. None of this has been easy. And I think everyone in our community, students, staff, our parents, everyone has been touched by this virus in different ways. So just being there to listen and support, and be understanding and empathetic, and also, again, clear on communication with them is the advice that I would have.
And Juan, any advice to your colleagues?
I'll double down on what Holly just said, and one of the things that I think has been successful here also is accessibility. I have regular town hall meetings with for parents and staff, and so that's a clear line of communication. And especially when things are starting to shift and change, I get in there and offer town hall meetings so that they can have an opportunity to ask questions and make sure that they understand what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Holly Eads, Superintendent at Orcutt Union Elementary School District. Our former ACSA President, Juan Cruz, Superintendent at Franklin McKinley Elementary School District in San Jose, our Region 8 board member. We know both of you have 1:30 meetings. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's been an honor to have you here on the show. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Both.
All right. So, Edgar, you were complaining that I didn't give you enough time to talk. So now here we go.
now you're going to put me on the spot, right?
Now I'm going to put you on the spot. See what happens. Martha Monahan asks a question. I believe Cal OSHA is not aligned with the state. RE indoor masking in schools. Does this mean that our teachers must remain masked on Monday? What can you tell us?
Yeah, and I appreciate Frank Donovan with an assist there, helped us answer the question. So I appreciate folks helping each other out. No, they actually have aligned. The Cal OSHA rules are consistent with the CDPH. So employees, notwithstanding collective bargaining or any local agreements or county rules, from the state perspective, employees also do not need to be masked beginning effective at the end of the day on Friday. So they did go ahead and make those rules consistent.
And does that answer Angela's question as well? I know that Frank had responded. Angela asked, is there policy guidance or threshold in place that would make masking a requirement again?
Yeah, and this is part of I think what they're getting at from a state perspective. You know, Dr. Galley a couple weeks ago when they made this announcement, they did talk about that there could be conditions. They're not spelling those out, like if case rates are X amount, that we're going to go back to a mask mandate. But they did, I think it's fair to say, they did throw out there that this is an iterative process, that if the health situation changes, the state could potentially go back. And, you know, in the early days, we talked about this dimmer of on and off, that there is that flexibility also at the local level. I think what the state put out in terms of these local considerations is just that. Take a look at your case rates, take a look at transmission. Are you having staffing issues because of COVID? That there is that ability to modify that at the local level as well.
Amy Wynn Hernandez asked the question, and this one I think is really key, because if there's one thing that I know, my wife, who's a kindergarten teacher, talks about this all the time, that parents, grandparents, guardians used to come and help out in the classrooms, especially the elementary school classrooms, and they haven't been able to. So Amy asked the question, do unvaccinated visitors to school sites need to be vaccinated or show negative test results like our unvaccinated staff? What do we know about this?
Yeah, so we've been getting the question a lot about unvaccinated folks and you know, in terms of the employees, about what were the conditions on that end. So that when it has to do with employees or volunteers, frankly, that sometimes we treat the rules apply to them almost in the same way. Nothing in this announcement changed about masking or not masking in terms of vaccination status. This has been a big question. It gets a little trickier when we're talking about volunteers because there had been different rules depending on local districts. I will say that you're seeing a trend in other states that as the COVID rates have gone down, they have also backed off on some of the vaccination mitigation strategies. That wasn't part of the announcement I don't believe there's any changes to the CDPH guidance, but I think this is something we're going to have to keep an eye on. Is there bigger changes in the rules, not with just with masking, but with vaccination? I will say the governor has been pretty clear that their efforts around vaccination are still a go, and they believe that that's part of a bigger strategy as well.
I'm thinking that we need to have Dr. Frank Donovan be part of our social media comment section, because he's taking care of some of our viewers. It's this great aspect of having this show.
You may have to put him on payroll, Naj, is what you're gonna have to do for helping answer some of the questions.
You know what we'll do? We'll ask Mark Edgar that next week when he is back. Hey, before we ask Edgar this final question, I do want to remind those of you who may be new to our show, or if you have been watching us for a while and haven't subscribed, go ahead and do that. If you like what you see, go ahead and subscribe to us on YouTube. Like us over on Facebook so you can get immediate information and alerts when we're about to come on live with something. Edgar, let me wrap this here. We've got a big day coming up here on Friday, or just after Friday, and the ramp up to Monday the 14th. It seems like we're going to have a lot to talk about next week when we come back on the show about what those first few days have been like. But so often you have said, hey, let's take a breath. Let's just, be calm and let's see how this moves. These next few days are going to be really pivotal for our education leaders. Is there one thing that you would say to them as we move forward, and maybe how they can serve their students as we head into next week?
Yeah, and I mean, for all the headlines that the masking mandate, the changes in the masking mandate engendered, right? That, oh, it's going to end. We're seeing this play out in real time now, that communities are taking a very different approaches depending on what's going on in their community, the conversations with their local partners, their parents, their employees, students. And I worry a little bit that now it's really on our folks, right? For better, for worse, it's on our folks. And they're either going to be celebrated for making some of the decisions, or in some communities, undoubtedly, folks are not going to agree with them, and there's going to be pressure on them. So I think just having that support of each other, of their colleagues, of community. I think Holly said it. Juan touched on that. I think the communication end, because here's the thing, that the state rules are changing by the day. We know that a lot of folks aren't paying attention to all this. They're going to show up on Monday. The headlines in probably our state paper is going to be, first day state masks aren't required. Undoubtedly, there's going to be a surprise in some districts. Wait, I thought we didn't have to wear masks. Why do we still have to wear masks? So I think our leaders hit it on the head about the communication, the engagement. Making this a group effort is probably the best strategy as we move into this next phase of the rules and the requirements.
Yep, there's always the next phase. All right, folks, best of luck as we head towards next week and the end of the mandatory masking mandate. Of course, if there's any news or information that changes, we will bring that to you here from ACSA. Until then, have a great rest of the day, great rest of the week, and we'll see you next Wednesday here, live and interactive, the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, 1 p.m. on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Have a great rest of the day.